Oh, powered by candy.
And I'm not set for Halloween at all.
Oh, I like your, that's a nice dress up, you know, I think. Hello, how are you doing?
And Tracy's
Hi,
on
John.
over, so.
An old guy, old guy's on this end, huh?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Is that the, oh, that's the Colorado team, huh?
Yeah, they won
I
the
was-
championship.
Oh, did they? I haven't even paid attention. Oh, we ready to go? Yeah.
I guess that Ricky over said something about your aunt,
This is a good.
so we can, but I'm
Well, you can.
supposed to introduce Mark, so this is Mark Daniels, whom I've known practically since the moment I walked into Vermillion when I moved back here.
Yeah.
When he came to help me unpack. And I think probably most of you know each other or seen each other, so I'll just turn it over to Mark and let you enlighten us.
Awesome, thank you. Hello, folks there too. It's excited to see people out in Zoom land and people here, the witches are witch over here, Yuki's in the back. Candy eaters in the front here, I noticed. I don't know what everyone looks like on the other end, so I guess I don't get to see that, but yeah, here I am today, and this is a topic I'm really excited about. I really feel honored to be here. I was asked by some of the folks on OLLI to do this, and oh, and I have a clicker and everything now. I probably have to push a button.
That's all
I'm
you
guessing
gotta
it's
do.
the.
Yep.
I'm just
It's
gonna
already
test it out.
working.
Oh, yeah, well, look at that. And so one of the great things I did, though, I've given similar presentations a number of times, and usually I'm restricted to an hour. And I asked to get a little extra time with this because often it stimulates a lot of conversation. And I really like to do this too as we go. Feel free at any time to ask questions or make comments, more like a seminar format where we're kind of discussing these things. And it's also two parts. So today is part one, and in a week, I don't know what holiday that's going to be. We'll have to make it up, but we'll do the second part, which is kind of like, okay, we're going to learn about kind of LGBTQ plus and Two Spirit people and what those things might mean. And then how do we provide a supportive place for them? And I say them, that might include us, right? I don't want to act like them as some outside group of people. It's within our wonderful, rich, beautiful human family. We're going to just talk about one part of that amazing rainbow. So let me introduce myself a little more. Mark Daniels, I work at Sanford, got my badge on. I don't represent Sanford here today, just so you know that. They might come after me. No, it sort of depends. Some parts of Sanford are really supportive of the kind of queer LGBTQ plus and Two Spirit community, and some are less so. And one of the exciting things is we have a new provider coming in next year that we've hired has an expertise in hormone therapy, which is a part of an intervention or a gender affirming care for some transgender people. And so that's really exciting. Also, well, I'll get into it when I get in. So the title is LGBTQ plus, and already you're like, what? Sometimes the Two Spirit is just 2S too. Sometimes it comes at the end, sometimes it comes at the beginning, sometimes it's not included. But we're going to look at basics and all of this. You know, I do this from Native Indigenous perspective a lot. I mean, I grew up in a very conventional Western world too, so I often bridge those two gaps. But I'll use terms like this, like making relatives, because like I said, the people we're talking about are our relatives and could even be someone right in this room right now. So first thing I want to do is a land acknowledgement. You know, we sit literally on the lands of the Umaha or the Omaha people, and the Ocheti Shakoi or the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota 7 Council Fire peoples and others too, other indigenous peoples who who are the stewards of this land. And so I want to always help us remember that, because our modern culture has sort of moved into this space, displacing, a lot of indigenous peoples and indigenous lifeways. So I want to start off though. Well, that chat thing, that's nice to have it up there. So we already have a chat thing. Someone knows how to see what the chat is. My son Dylan is a transgender man, and several years back he sent me this very profound comic. What's going on? I can see through you. My son told me he's transgender, so that makes me transparent. So I'm transparent, and I thought that was kind of clever and cute when he sent that to me. So, and here's a picture of us a couple of years ago, just down at the plots at one of our rallies to protect trans children and the trans community and Two Spirit people. So I'm the good-looking one on. Let's see, that's the right, and then he's on the left. So, the old disclosure thing, I have no financial interests or relationships to disclose, except I will be selling. No, just kidding. I have some non-financial relationships. I'm a member of the Society of Indian Psychologists and of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH that's called. And I'm also on the board of directors for the Transformation Project South Dakota, which is an absolutely remarkable nonprofit organization that we've been going since, I think we started in 2019, and this started little, and it's just like, boom. I think Ariana Grande, one of those famous singers, gave us hundreds of thousands of dollars last year as part of her support for the queer community and transgender people. And you hear me use that term queer. Some of you, I noticed, like, because a lot of us, like I was taught, we would never, that was like a pejorative term that we would use. And that's been re-owned by many people who kind of fit in this, what we'll be talking about today. So I use that because it's a part of the terminology that's kind of currently used. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Transformation Project. So, like I said, we started in 2019. This week, last week, Friday, we opened a beautiful center for the LGBTQ plus and Two Spirit community, and it's sort of sponsored by the Transformation Project. It's up in Sioux Falls. We have a ribbon cutting coming up this week. I can't remember the exact dates and times, but if you do Facebook, you can find the Transformation Project there, and you could get any information you need about that. Or you can also just look up the Transformation Project. You can Google it, and we have a website too.
Is this South Dakota or national?
This is South Dakota, and our hope is that we're developing a model that other states could use. As you see in the, well, doesn't say it all in there, but our mission is to do, so let me read this. Our mission is to support and empower transgender individuals and their families while educating communities, in South Dakota and the surrounding region about gender identity and expression. And so we sort of define that as roughly 90 miles. So we go into the states around us too. And then we work with lots of other organizations in other states and national and even international organizations too. So that's a good question, but we're really, interestingly, we're one of the leading organizations like this, and some of the national organizations have sent us people, particularly during the legislation times, to help us organize, and they've paid the paid for those people to come and spend a month or two with us. Because they knew we're on the front. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, have you received any sort of feedback from the state government about this?
Christy and I are pretty much best friends, so. Yeah. No, well, let me back up a little bit. We have actually a lawsuit against the Governor Nome and the state government, I believe. I'm not sure exactly how it's written, but was this about a year ago? There's a lot of anti-trans, there's some really powerful anti-trans organizations, national organizations that really play a role in all this legislation that's happening in places who it's not really an issue with, but they alerted, apparently, I don't know the whole story, but anyway, Christy Nome, we had a grant from the federal government that was, I guess the state was the one sort of in charge of it, for a community health worker. And we had hired a person for that position. And when she got word of that, so we went through the whole grant process. The state approved our grant. And then she pulled the grant. And so,
Wow.
and even the intention of the grant was to serve like underserved people too. So, we fit right in line with everything that the grant was asking for. So, yeah, so I think I'm supposed to say no comment. So that's a no comment. But that's just what I know. And just till you know, initially, the first, I think it's been about a year or year and a half. This used to say empower transgender youth and young adults versus individuals. That was our initial focus when we did this. But it quickly became apparent to us in our state, there weren't any other major services serving the rest of the adult population. And we often ended up doing that anyway. So we just said, let's just build that into, shift our mission statement so that we can include the whole trans community. An acknowledgement and an invitation. So here's my acknowledgement, and we have two chat things. God, I wish I knew how to access those. I guess I can go.
Yep, there you go. Just put it on the chat button and it'll show up. Now click. Oh,
Showing up somewhere.
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Ribbon cutting is next week, Wednesday.
November
So great,
8th.
thank you all. Yeah, Lawrence knows everything. Great. Thank you, Lawrence. Yeah, so Wednesday the 8th at 4:30 in Sioux Falls at the center, this remarkable center. And if you know Lawrence, he's played such a big role in LGBTQ plus and Two Spirit issues over the years. Is there a second one on there? It says two, so I can see that one. Okay.
Can you scroll down, see the thing on the left? Yeah, you got it. There. It was, yep, there you go.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Stacy. And now how do I get rid of you? That's really.
Very nice.
Right over there.
There.
Yeah.
You need to bring my 13-year-old next time who would know exactly what to do. But I have both an acknowledgement and an invitation to you. And my acknowledgement is I am not a transgender person. I am not among the LGBTQ plus area. And so I recognize that I just want to be humbled to that place. I come, I do the best I can. And so, but it, my preference would always be to hear from someone who's in the community. But you get me instead. So, one of the pieces of that too is another acknowledgement is that the language that's used is ever evolving. I mean, honestly, the language, you know, there are new terms probably that aren't going to be in my in the slideshow, because people are starting to think, wow, here's where I am. And there's space for me to kind of define where this is. And if it doesn't fit into one of the other, neatly into another category, they might be able to use language that would help better express where they're at. And so, so that's just something to know. There seem to be some general concepts and ideas that seem to be pretty more stable. And I don't know if stable is really the right word, but yeah, that will, that I think will be helpful for you though. And the invitation is, I also recognize that the people I get to be in here with are from a variety of places, you know, your experiences, the things that have shaped you over the years, the culture, the religion, the wars, the, you know, rural and city and all of those pieces, and, you know, what your ethnic background and all of those things play a role in who you are, right? And you might have different viewpoints or understandings as we approach this. And so my invitation to you is to find that space that's just that can be open-hearted, that can just listen and discuss and talk about, but that can, if need be, allow for some different ways of thinking and ideas to come in. Because really for me, when my son Dylan shared with me that he was transgender, he turned 29 on Friday. And he was in his early 20s. I think he was 22 or 23. And I didn't really know what that meant. I mean, I really had to educate myself. I had just taken the job at USD, and I had little sticky notes all around my two computer screens with words I had to learn, you know, because I wanted to know, I wanted to understand. And so I had some of the words we're going to have in here, those were, and they were up there until I moved to a new office a year ago. So, so that's my invitation to you, is that you can come to this with an open heart and an open mind. Come on, baby. I did something that maybe deactivated it. Let's see if that will work. Okay, maybe that one. No, I think, is that my next one? Let's pretend it is. Yeah, I think it's this, yeah. So, and the pictures you've seen so far in that one that had the transformation project, we have a wonderful magazine, we call it, called Transforming South Dakota. And we've just made now 3 issues. So most of these are from the first, this is actually the cover of the second one. And the magazine has the stories people share, trans people share their stories. Both the hardships and struggles and the beauties, and they get to go wherever they want to have their photo taken and get photos taken as part of their story. Those who wanted those, or some people, there were a few younger ones who didn't want to be identified, so the pictures were, they had pictures, but they weren't ones that could be easily identified. Because there's danger too, right? There can be danger in having your photo in a. And then we sent these out to all of our legislators, to all of the churches and synagogues and other spiritual centers that we're able to connect with. Some of them have really openly received them. Some of them have sent them back. We sent them out to all the counselors, the school counselors in the state, and we share them regularly too with others. I'll bring some with me next time, so I'll have some with me. And interestingly, this is Dylan's partner here. This is April Matson. So we have three objectives. First of all, we're going to sort of briefly define two-spirit individuals. I mean, we could do an entire presentation or probably a class really looking at that. We're going to unscramble LGBTQ plus. That's pretty easy. And then kind of the meat of this is going to be looking to understand what is to differentiate between sex, our gender identity, and our sexual orientation. And because those often get kind of squished together. And a lot of us don't understand those things really clearly. So that's what we'll do. So let's jump into Two Spirit identity and Native or Indigenous LGBTQ plus people. So the term Two Spirit, I mean, this is a more modern term actually, and it's a pan-Indian term used across Indigenous people, generally in the US and in Canada. And it's a unifying kind of umbrella term, as I said, from the States and from Canada, the First Nations people there, that describes an individual who has both masculine and feminine spirits or essence. And what I think is really critical and what differentiates it probably from the more Western thought about LGBTQ ideas is that it is an intersection of one's spiritual, sexual, gender, and cultural identities. And so, and we'll see later that the people in Native culture who are Two Spirit, and each tribe had different terminologies for this, but people who are Two Spirit were seen as, and in some cases, because colonization has played its role for sure, but it's starting to be re-recognized and are seen as really sacred individuals from a family or a tribe, a band, and usually have roles that are really super important in their tribe. So this term is only used for Indigenous people because I think a lot of non-Indigenous people, when they hear it and they hear those ideas of male and female, they make sense to a lot of people. But this term itself is used among Indigenous people, and it's really different for every person. And going on to the next one, I'll kind of put these two together a little bit, but not all Native people or Indigenous people who are in the LGBTQ plus area call themselves Two Spirit. And that's true also the other way around, because of the more complex definition of what it means to be Two Spirit. Some Two Spirit people don't use more Western terms to identify themselves. But each person comes to this in a different place. And here you see this wonderful photo of two really remarkable Two Spirit people, Philippa and Muffy from Pine Ridge. And they do a lot of work. They've done a lot of work getting gay marriage legalized on the reservations, because it happened in the states, but not on the sovereign nations. And so they've done work in our state to make that happen. And they're often at a lot of the Two Spirit powwows and those sort of events. And they just do a lot of really great work. But like I said, not all Native people use that term. And when they do, it can mean different things for different people. And sometimes it's an evolving one. Yes.
So from the way you're presenting this, I get the idea that the Two Spirit people were respected or honored among the Native Americans, whereas in our culture, they're pretty much ostracized.
Yeah.
Is that a
Yeah,
fair?
yeah, that's accurate. And interestingly, and I'm not going to go into that in great depths, but you'll find if lots of cultures outside of Western culture honored people who were, who were Two Spirit people, or people who were LGBTQ plus people who, yeah, so that's not even unique to Native culture. But yeah, good point. Like I said, it's a contemporary term, and it's important to note that, because you may or may know, pronouns are a real important part of when we work with trans people and we talk to trans people, our relationships with transgender people, and a lot of Native people use pronouns too, but once again, there's sort of just, it's important to note that that's kind of another kind of colonial part of all of this too. So the Indian Health Service, this is what they say about Two Spirit people. Traditionally, Native American Two Spirit people were male, female, and sometimes intersex individuals who combined activities of both men and women with traits unique to their status as Two Spirit people. In most tribes, they were considered neither men nor women. They occupied a distinct alternative gender status. And so, as you might know, the Indian Health Service is a federal government agency. And if we look at some of the traditional roles of Two Spirit people, we had mediators, we had decision makers, we had medicine people, warriors. We had a chance a few years back to go out to Pine Ridge and sit in a teepee with Rick Two Dogs, honored medicine person, and his wife, who is everything he is, I think, in those ways. And we were with a youth group, and we sat in there, and they were talking about Two Spirit people. And one, they had a big issue with using the term Two Spirit because they didn't like that. Because they said nobody has two spirits. So that was, it was more like the idea isn't so much that you might have two separate spirits, but that you have, kind of two pieces. Yeah.
Doesn't everybody have both male and female characteristics?
Yeah. It seems like it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think of the psychologist Carl Jung, who said that men have an anima, the female part of them, and women have an animus.
Right.
It's just the male part of them.
Right. Yeah, and so that's the question, what differentiates that from someone who would be a Two Spirit person or a person who would be considered transgender. And so, as we look into here, we'll kind of look at those ideas, and you can see if that gets better defined for you or not. But it was interesting with this couple, these elders who were sharing with us. They said they were telling us about some women, people who were assigned female at birth, who were these ferocious warriors, and the name that they were given, and I wish I knew Lakota better, but it was the name for a male buffalo. That was the name they were given. And once again, so you sort of see this sort of honored status they had in that. But, peacemakers, teachers, name givers, you hear a lot of stories of some of the really important, historically Native people being named by Two Spirit people. Caretakers of children, visionaries, heyokas, if you know that term, that's a Lakota term, or probably a Oceti Shakowee term. But it's the heyokas are like sacred people who are the clowns who often do everything backwards. And And so, and here's just some, what's happening. South Dakota has this summer had its second powwow, or Sioux Falls, its second Two Spirit powwow. So it had the one in 2022 and then one this summer. And then the first one in the Black Hills happened this year. And these two you see are the royalty. So even in powwow ways, it's pretty binary, right? Line down the middle, male, female. You have the powwow princess, right? But they use the term royalty. And so you have Monty. And I can't, he was the first one. I don't remember this person's name, so I apologize for that. But I remember going to this Wachipi and seeing them there. So that's the person who actually this year is representing the Sioux Falls Two Spirit powwow. So now we're going to switch gears and we're going to unscramble LGBTQ plus. And some of you know these terms and they won't be a surprise to you, and others they might be. So I just literally listed them. L is for lesbian, G is for gay, B is for bisexual, T is for transgender, and Q is for queer and questioning. And sometimes you'll see it longer than that. You might see an I for intersex. You might see there are other letters. And so plus is used, and people put the plus in it, usually different places because it's ever evolving once again. And we'll see even some of these terms, there might be new terms that might express things better for some people. And we'll get into that. So a little bit just to start off with this word, because there's a lot of understanding and misunderstanding around the term transgender. What does it mean? And the reason it's so tricky is because it has it's kind of like the big T and the little t. So the big T is, it's this large umbrella term for any person who doesn't feel, whose gender identity isn't consistent with how they were identified at birth. And I don't know if I said that in there somewhere, but so an umbrella term for persons whose gender identity, gender expression, or behavior does not conform to that typically associated with their sex assigned at birth. And we use that term a lot, sex assigned at birth, because it's easy to assume that if you look this way when you come out of the womb, that's who you are, when we're learning that that's not always the case. Sometimes it's not the case biologically, and sometimes it's not the case in terms of a person's own identity of gender. Sometimes also called transgender and gender diverse or gender expansive. Sometimes they use gender non-conforming, but I don't really like that term too much. It seems a little restrictive to me. And so that's another term I use. Here's a wonderful two-spirit family. Yes, a wonderful two-spirit family. And this was at the court hearing a couple of years ago. I think it was House Bill 1057 that was before the one of the branches at that time. I show you this because this was shared with me with a Native person who was a two-spirit person, and it just was really helpful for me. And so what I want you to imagine, you've probably seen this sometime in your life where you've been out, camping, or maybe you live out of town a little bit where there's not so much light pollution, or, you've been somewhere in your life where you just look up and you can just see all this amazing stars and this I'd like you to kind of think of that when we, instead of a binary, where we use this line and we say you're on this side or you're on this side of the line, you're one of two things, that when we look at even sex, even our physical, biological sex, it probably fits better into this kind of way of imagining each of us being, none of us being exactly like the other person, and unique. And as we look at sexual orientation and gender identity too. So that's part of that initial, when I was kind of saying, you know, an invitation is to try to open your space up for a different way of conceptualizing some of these areas. So what I kind of developed from different things I was learning and understanding was this, what I call a triangle of understanding. And so it's got these three areas in it. You know, it's got the sex in it, the biological piece of it. And of course, we're going to simplify things. We don't have time to really get into every detail. We're going to look at gender, and we're going to look at attraction. And sexual orientation will fall in that space there. So first of all, let's take a look at sex. So this is a term, you know, generally we think of it as a binary. I want to use that term binary, you know, bi, two, one side or the other. And it's a label. And what do? I mean, anyone in here who's a parent? So several people who are parents, like, you know, what's when you're going to have a child, right? That's like a question. Or if you're auntie or uncle or something else, you know, it's like, what's the baby going to be? You know, and now, you know, in modern times, we can know that well before they're born, and, you know, already have, you know, whatever colors we want to put in the room and somehow identify them. And what's it generally based on when when that terminology, you know, how do we generally base that on?
Their genitals.
Yeah, it's generally what kind of, and the genitals you can see too, right? So it's, yeah. And so that's you know, I mean, I guess if you're a betting person, that might be the best system to use, but it's not completely accurate, you know, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. So, you know, the most common terms we use are female and male. And as language, you know, continues to develop, a term we often use for female now is assigned female at birth, because my son, Dylan, was assigned female at birth. We said, oh, it's a girl. The doc said, oh, it's a girl. You know, oh, we have 3 girls, you know. We just didn't know we were going to have 3 girls, and one of them would wear their baseball cap from about the time they were this size. I always joke that they were born with a baseball cap, but have their baseball cap on backwards. And so they also use the term AFAB too, just the acronym for that. So, and in male, assigned male at birth, or AMAB. And then there's this third area that a lot of us aren't familiar with called intersex. And the research shows that, you know, 2 to 4% of people have, you know, some variation in their sexual, the things that determine our sex, right? Chromosomes, genitalia, other things that don't fit into the typical male or female kind of definitions or paradigms. And that 1 to 2 out of 1,000 will receive corrective genital surgery for that. So, and I don't know if you've ever heard those stories, but sometimes people present with kind of both. And so doctors and parents make choices, and sometimes those choices don't end up aligning with how a person sees or understands themselves either. So And obviously that's not an easy situation to be in if you're a parent and, you know, and particularly in a culture that really wants you to define your child as a very binary male or female. So that's just a brief look at kind of, in a sense, like what's between your legs, you know, the genitalia part or that part of us. So now we're going to take a look. I better check no chat things. Okay. We're going to look at gender. And so gender is this really interesting kind of social construct in some ways, right? It's like kind of the things you're supposed to do, your legal status, you know, how you're supposed to behave, how you're supposed to act, what clothes you should be wearing, all of those kinds of things, you know, and they should generally fit into you're a male or you're a female. So that's kind of how a general description of gender. I want to look at two different pieces of it though. So first of all, let's look at gender identity. So in gender identity, there's kind of three. Can I undo that? Oh, wow, look at that.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're set, except for a little thing on the side, but we'll make that work. So a term that's used now is cisgender or cis. And I think that's a Latin term that means the same, like the same side as. And so, you know, this happens frequently when we're, you know, we have sort of a more single way of seeing things, and when things seem to be outside of the norm, right? And we think there's a norm and there's not a norm, but now we're just deciding that what we used to think is the norm is what we would call a cisgender person, right? So that's a person who's their gender, their sense of their self. So this is how a person sees themselves in the world. So this is where you're going to get the difference between gender and like sexual orientation or attraction, because this is how do I see myself? You know, how do each of you see yourself? And so cisgender is someone who sees themselves consistent with the way they were identified when they were born. A transgender or trans person, and that terminology is fine to use because sometimes people say, is it all right if I say trans? That terminology is frequently used. That term means across from or on the other side of. And this is someone whose gender, it's still a binary, right? It's got a line in it, but who was identified, like in the case of my son Dylan, as a female at birth, but who sees himself as a man and understands himself to be a man. And so, so you have a transgender man or a trans man, and that's a person who was assigned female at birth, but who sees themselves as a man and presents generally as a man. And sometimes the term FTM is used, female to male. I don't see that term being used frequently though. That seems to kind of maybe be more passé. And transgender woman is similar. So this is a person who was assigned male at birth, right? And who presents, who sees themselves, understands themselves to be a woman. You might, I don't know if any of you remember Eve. She used to work at the coffee shop a few years back. And I think there was a picture of her in that first picture with all the people from the Transforming South Dakota project. But Eve was a person who grew up here and who was assigned male at birth and who identified as a female and continues to do that. And so that's kind of an example of a transgender woman. Because sometimes that's another area people like, oh, which way do I go? Are you, you know, they're not quite sure how they're supposed to define someone there. So, and so once again, when I said transgender gender, that word has a big T. The big T is that it's anyone who's outside of the way, whose gender is, doesn't align with their assigned sex at birth. But it's not always the opposite of. It could be in the middle, it could be, imagine the stars, it could be a zillion different places. So that's the big umbrella definition. The smaller definition is a person who's across from, who is in a binary system still, but on the other side of the binary. And then you have this term non-binary is used, gender fluid, gender queer, gender expansive, agender, and there's lots of other terms that are used. And in this case, this is someone who doesn't, imagine the stars again, there's like a zillion different ways, but they don't see themselves necessarily as male or female, or maybe they see themselves as both of those. Or maybe they see themselves, maybe it even is fluid in them. Like one day they might feel more female and one day they might feel more male, and present those ways. So that term's often used. You'll hear non-binary, NB, sometimes they is a short, just the initials NB. Or sometimes ENBE, I think is another way. And we're going to talk about pronouns, but most commonly cisgender people use the pronouns of the gender they were identified with, or the sex they were identified with at birth. Trans usually use the pronoun of the way they're identifying, which would be opposite of the way they were identified at birth. So that's tricky, right? So if you've got a kid who's trans and for 15 years you've called them he, right? And then he says, I want to change my name to, Estella, and I want to use she, her pronouns. You can see some of the challenges that are there, and I don't want to pretend either, as supportive as I am in this community, that this is always an easy transition. It's not easy, definitely, for the people going through it. I mean, it's really difficult and painful, and for many of them, and for their families and their loved ones and people who care for them. And people have investments in names, right? Like if you've named a child, you probably didn't just point to the first name that came. You were very thoughtful about the reason you gave it. It might be a grandparent's name or a great grandparent's name, or your favorite movie star, or you might name a Mark after me. There's a lot of a lot of times we're invested in those names, right? And then all of a sudden that doesn't feel right to this person and they want to change it and a name that fits them better, So it's important to sort of recognize some of the challenges and struggles, both for trans people and also for their families, their loved ones, and others.
So only 1 or 2 out of 1,000 have surgery?
For intersex. Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah, so we're not talking transgender surgery. We're talking
okay.
people who identify whose sexual organs don't really fit into a male or female. So that's really a pretty small number as it is. That's 2 to 4% of the people. I always hear it's about the same number as there are redheads. That's about the number of intersex people. And then even a smaller number of those people will ever have surgery to, sort of make them one way or the other. Does that make more sense to you or not? You looked a little confused.
Yeah, I just didn't know I thought you meant in the whole trans.
No, so
community.
let
Only
me
1 to 2 have surgery.
buzz back to that one. Yeah, so this was under the intersex. So, and I know all these words get confusing, right? So we were talking about ways people identify like your sex. kind of between your legs, nothing to do really with trans in this one. But it does play an interesting role later for people who are trans, because some people, you know, they might look a particular way and feel a different way, so. Okay, so let's look at gender expression a little bit. I mean, that's pretty simple concept, right? It's how we express. I mean, interesting, if I just look right now at this front row, there's some similar, I mean, there's uniqueness in dress. I mean, I don't know where our witch went, but pumpkin on the end here. We've got a couple pumpkins, and but the two people who I would identify as cisgender men both have button-up shirts, you know, and wear kind of a different clothing, and the women wear more feminine clothing, probably have more jewelry on too. Not always, not every one, but like I said, that's what I love about the idea of the stars, because even if I call myself a woman, right, there's lots of ways to be a woman. Or if I call myself a man, there's lots of ways to be a man, and both in how we think about ourselves, how we look too, you know. I mean, if we looked at everybody's genitalia, I should have had you all come naked today, but I forgot to put that in the note. But you know, I mean, we want to see that we're all different, right? We all
A smaller group, I think.
I don't know. Might have been a different group, but I'm not necessarily so smaller. So can we hold the comments down?
Yeah.
But gender expression, of course, is how, you know, we do that through our clothing, through you know, makeup, behavior, right? Even we behave different, males and females in certain ways. I mean, there's plenty of crossover, but there are certain behaviors that would be considered more feminine and more masculine. And so you look at all of those things, and so you sort of have three, you know, if we're going to group it in three main ways. We have the feminine or femme, and you have the masculine or butch, and androgynous that probably doesn't fit into either of those categories. So that's sort of, so, you know, we've got the sex, what's between your legs, then we've got the gender, that's like how I understand myself, how I see myself in this world. And now we're going to look at attraction. And generally attraction, you know, is both looked at as our sexual orientation, but people can also have romantic attraction without it necessarily being linked to sexual attraction. And that might sound a little weird, but those two things aren't necessarily synonyms. And so some people can have very strong romantic connection to someone without it being sexual. But you'll sort of see that these two kind of parallel each other. And so going back to the letters that we were looking at, gay or lesbian, and lesbian's pretty specific, right? That refers to two people who cisgender women who are attracted to each other. Gay is a term that can be used really in both genders. I mean, it's used sometimes exclusively for men, or sometimes just to refer to anyone, gay or lesbian. Straight is a term that we use. So you used to hear terms more like homosexual and heterosexual. We don't hear those terms used much anymore. So straight is a common term that's used for someone who's attracted to someone of the other gender. And then you have bisexual, that's the, what is it, LGB, the B in the LGBTQ. And this is a term that you hear, another term that's often heard now is pansexual. Have you heard that term at all? You know, and that's even Now we've introduced people who might not fit in a real binary male or female, that bi, who might be trans, who might be non-binary. Pansexual means you're attracted to, you could be attracted to anyone, whether it was romantically or sexually, irregardless of their gender. Or sometimes you'll get people who say, I'm pansexual with a preference for this, and this. Hang out with, like, you know, someone who's between 15 and 22, and you'll really get a good education. Take this first, take this class first, so you have a little bit of understanding. Yeah, but it's really interesting, you know, how a new sort of freedom to really try to understand themselves and both how they see themselves, how they see their attraction to other people.
Yes.
The scoliosex-sexual, I really like that one. That's attraction to someone who's a trans person. So
I've never heard so we.
yeah.
What does scolio mean?
Flat root.
What would a good professor do? Why don't you do a paper on that? When you don't know the answer.
I don't know flat root.
I had to look that one up again. I've done this, you know, similar presentation more than once, but I have to look it up every time. And then asexual, have you heard that term? You know, so people who don't, or whose primary interest in another person is not sexual. And it doesn't necessarily, if you hear someone's asexual, doesn't mean that they will have a sexual relationship with someone. For some people, it might mean that, but it means that that's not their, they have to really have a strong emotional connection to that person before they would have an interest in kind of the sexual component. And you see those same sort of terminology, that same terminology used in romantic attraction. You know, so this is who you're attracted to. So, you know, you've got this, you know, your sex, you've got how you understand yourself, and then who is it you're attracted to. And you'll see that those things really get mixed together a lot, those terms do. And still I see that frequently, you know, as we're sort of trying to understand a different way of defining these things.
You know, the game show host on Let's Make a Deal, Wayne Brady, he just came out as pansexual.
Oh, I don't know him. That's a
Okay.
big deal. I don't remember
He's
that.
on at 9 o'clock in the morning from 9 to 10. He's very popular,
Mhm.
but it just makes me wonder why he thought he had to do that. I mean,
Why he
what-
thought he had to come out?
yeah, like he's married,
Mhm.
he's got children. Why would he come out like that?
That's a great question. And I don't know if, I want to make sure people can understand. I don't know if they could hear everything who are. So the question is, what's his name?
Wayne Brady, he's a game show host
Comedian too. He's
Wayne
in some
Brady,
other
who's a
things.
comedian and a
show
game
host.
show host.
Yeah.
on Let's Make a Deal.
Who's married, so lives a more straight
Conventional.
cisgender life.
Yes.
Has children, and then he recently came out as pansexual. I'll throw that question out here. Why do you think? Why would someone do that?
Well, I would think one of the reasons would hopefully be not so self-absorbed, but more altruistic in terms of helping to make it more
More normal.
accepted, yeah, in the world, and to support other people that feel that. So maybe one way would be people that you had no idea were going to be off that very straight and narrow. Maybe off that straight and narrow.
Yeah.
I can see that, but if he's married and he's happily married, why do you have to tell everybody?
We don't know that he's happily married.
Right.
Why would
And
he?
you didn't say how
Why
many
do you
people he's
know
married to. Coming from a Mormon tradition, saying someone's married does not necessarily.
His Wikipedia page indicates that he's been divorced twice
Oh,
and doesn't appear to be presently married.
Okay.
Oh my God.
I didn't get through the whole thing yet.
I did not know that was you, Joe. This.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, comment back here.
I looked up scolio and it means bent,
Oh.
and some people don't like that word because it sounds like it's
Yeah.
negative, so they prefer cetero, cetero, which means other.
Oh,
And I do think that's probably a better term.
Maybe I like that too better.
Bent is-
Yeah.
Yeah, bent seems like has a negative.
Yeah.
right.
And
Which is
scoliosis,
bad.
scoliosis,
Fine.
yeah.
Yes.
Oh, right.
Bent.
right. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
Appreciate
exactly.
you doing
I
that.
would write a paper, but I think this is sufficient.
Close enough for now.
Would you write that down for me? Send it to me in an email. No, I thank you very much for doing that. I appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing, right? I mean, one of the other things, and I don't really cover that in this, but I mean, when we talk, it would probably fit into this section of attraction. You know, I grew up in the Mormon way. I'm a 6th generation Mormon. I'm no longer a member of the church, but you can't really leave Mormonism, right? I mean, particularly if you grow up in Salt Lake, it's like, it's the culture you grow up in. And there's lots of wonderful, beautiful things about LDS way, a focus on service and families and love and compassion, and fit in this box that looks like this. And for some reason I didn't fit in that box too well. But anyway, what was I going? There's a lot of, so this is kind of an interesting paradox coming from the LDS way, but in the current big Mormon church, however 16 or 20 or 30 million people there are, that it's one man, one woman, and when you're married, it's not till death do you part. It is for time and all eternity. And so that relationship is really, really stressed. And like the divorce rate among people who are married in the Mormon temple is like, I think it's 8% or something like that. I mean, it's like extremely, extremely low. And so that was the way I grew up, right? I mean, always hearing that, and yet having this other history that had, we could go downtown to the Mormon temple, and where Brigham Young's house is on Temple Square, and where his 32 wives lived in, so we had other stories that we heard too. And, but, it just is our general culture. There's been a focus on sort of one woman, one man, right? Not really an acknowledgement of gender identities behind that. But people live, what's the term, that polyamorous? Have you heard of that term? Or polyamory? People live in different ways of being polyamorous. I have a child who's in a polyamorous relationship, and she lives with she's a cisgender woman, and I think he's a cisgender man, and really super nice guy. And I think their primary relationship is in each other, but that it's not exclusively that. And I don't really know what the rules are that they've created or how they navigate that. But people do that, right? I remember the first time I went to a rainbow gathering, not this kind of rainbow, the hippie rainbow gathering. Wasn't my fault, but I went, and it was in the Black Hills, and we were with this, somehow there are like camps up there, groups of people from different, and we were with this group, this community who made some kind of almond butter. That was this community, that's what they did. But I was sitting next to this woman, and she told me she was what was the word, polyamorous, and that her girlfriend was there, and her girlfriend was in another camp with another guy. And like I was like, oh, really? Like, I was like, whoa, here's my chance. No, didn't happen that way. But just like, once again, it seems to me, I mean, I'm not saying that those things haven't existed for a long time, probably always, right? But there's a more openness to that way of being than there probably was before, and so someone who's pan or pansexual could have multiple partners of male, you know, of any gender, right? Gender orientation. And so, yeah, but those are always interesting questions, you know, why I think your idea might be right too. A lot of times people might, who are in positions where a lot of people will hear what they have to say, try to normalize things, try to recognize that there's, you know, I'm not the only pansexual person, because you might feel really weird, you know, I don't know if you were ever taught, were you ever taught it's all right to like, you know, girls or other, you know, I was taught.
It was not talked about ever. We all had to figure it out ourselves. And so it seems like this is all new business
Mhm.
or way more prevalent than it ever was before. And I don't know if that's true.
Or at least prevalent out of the box where it's seen and heard, right?
Yeah, but so we had to figure it out
But it's never.
and. What was I gonna say? Forgot.
That's all right. No, but yeah, I mean, although you see you had to figure it out, but if you're figuring it out was like me figuring it out, it was already figured out for me. Like I was gonna find a beautiful young woman, right? And that's who I was gonna, you know, that there weren't options for me, you know. And interestingly, I grew up in Mormon, Utah, and you know, I graduated in '83, and my younger brother's 4 and a half years younger than me. I was on a Mormon mission, went to France. I was sent to France, and when I came home, he was a teenager, and so I'm 22, I think. And your brother's gay, you know, and he came out. Not a very safe place to come out in Salt Lake City. Probably no place in 1983, or not many places, but even there less, you know. And then what's interesting, I don't have a lot of contact with him because he's kind of just pulled away from us, but you can look him up online, Jer Bear Jones, Jerber Jones on YouTube. And he is a noted drag queen, and he often used the term tranny. This is 20 years ago, worked for the tranny shack. And I think even my first, when I heard the term transgender and my son was telling me that, I'm thinking like, oh, that's an entertainer. That's not really like a person. That's a, you know, so, you know, so it's, you know, these undercurrents have been happening. And I remember I went to Brigham Young University. If you know, BYU is a Mormon college. It's actually, I think, the largest private university in the country, like 35,000 students. It's a huge school. And a lot of it's funded by the tithes that Mormons pay. I did research with a psychology professor, because to graduate with honors, you had to do like an honors thesis, which was fairly close to like a master's thesis. And there was this young psychology professor from Stanford. She was non-Mormon and her husband was Mormon, which is already unusual. And she was doing research in the homosexual community, and she became my mentor. And so I remember we did some survey research, but we did some other stuff where I would interview couples, and I remember interviewing couples whose parents were like leaders in the Mormon church, you know, and just seeing the pain, the struggle, because they couldn't be accepted by their own family, you know, they were pushed away and by their church, the religious way, they like that was meaningful to them, but they couldn't access that because they didn't fit in the box that was necessary to do that. And so yeah. So I mean, I can, yeah.
I don't want to hold up your.
No, you weren't here, but I encourage everyone to talk, and we just barely have anything left. So we've got 15 minutes.
Well,
So
I think for older people, this is so difficult, and they're struggling with a lot of, not these people, but some of my peers. And they're fighting the whole pronoun thing. And I'm sure, and I think a lot of our state legislatures fall into that group, and it's very, very fear based mindset. And I'm sure a lot of people are saying, well, this is just a fad and this is gonna go away. But I think the fact that you said, hang out with the 15 to 22-year-old, I think the fact that it's exploded and embraced, I think young people and some older people understand how constricting this is. And I think 50 years from now, we'll hardly be talking about gender in that way. And because like someone will say to me like, oh, well, that's just like a man. And I'll go, I have brothers, I have a husband, I have sons. Are you sure it's just something that all men do? Or
There's a lot of ways, just like a man can be too,
Yeah,
between
yeah, but
brothers, sons, and
it's personalities, it's so many other things. It's how you were brought up. It's so many other things. And of course, we've done that to women terribly, shut down women because of how we've constricted them. So I think that's part of the pushback and why young people are embracing it, because it just kind of relieves them from trying to fit into all these little pigeonholes.
yeah, and I think that's also why it evolves too, because now that sort of gate is open, you can find terminology that fits you, right? And that's really beautiful, where this single word used to have to fit you, or this single way of being had to fit you. Yeah, and I mean, I know some of you are too young to remember the 60s, but and revolution that was happening. Yeah. But think of there. I mean, some of you might even been those young people, in those times, really questioning the values of the mainstream. Once again, there's it's just part of that kind of psychosocial way we construct things, right? You've got one group is trying to keep everything the same, and you've got other people always pushing the edges, and it's often younger people who aren't indoctrinated in that and who have questions. And then you go to places like universities, right? Well, you used to be able to go to places like universities where you could question things. That's not always the case anymore, but yeah, so it's interesting. And I really appreciate that, what you're saying too, because there is resistance. I have the privilege too to work with youth, young adults, older adults, who are in LGBT community and more so particularly trans people. I mean, I had a client a few years back who was probably, older than me, by a year or two. And he or she was a trans person, and they were in a relationship with someone who was doing something important at USD, and I can't even remember what it was, some more ministerial position, and they didn't come out. They didn't feel like they could, And I think you even see, I think you see some people who are not all, but some, like, I think, do anyone know the Indigo Girls? Have you ever heard of that? That's a band, and they're generally seen as two lesbian women, and they're really remarkable people. But one of the two is much more masculine, much more butch, wherever we were on that. And it wouldn't surprise me if she were, and I could be wrong, I'm not saying this is the case, but if she were born today, that she might identify as a trans person. But she's the same age as I am, and that wasn't like an option, right? That was so I'm sure there are some butch women, and there are some trans men, and there wasn't space for that place to be, and so that's kind of interesting. And I think this is kind of the end here, so I kind of put all this together, and we still have a few minutes, but I just want to make sure I don't have some favorite slide that I forgot near the end. So this is kind of just the general outline of what we've been talking about. And I really like to start at this place, because before we can say, how do we provide a more inclusive environment? How do we sustain and support people? How do we use pronouns and names and things like that? I think it's really helpful for us, wherever we're at in this wonderful human beingness, to understand these dimensions that we've kind of talked about right here. Any questions about any of these areas? I don't see the thing for chat again, so maybe I could. No idea what I did. I guess move the mouse. That's what I did. Anybody have any questions here or online about that? We've got about 10 minutes, and yeah.
Can you talk a little about the identity pronouns? I have an acquaintance who refers to that person as they. Does that mean gender fluid, or does it really, what does it mean?
Fantastic question. Yeah, that's really a great question. So pronouns, so that's a big issue, particularly among transgender people. And when I say I'm using that big transgender, so trans male to, transgender men, transgender women, but also non-binary or genderqueer, or people who don't fit into the binary. And a lot of Two-Spirit people use those terms too. My hidden-in-law, I'll call them, April, who we saw the red shirt in one of the earlier ones, Two-Spirit person, uses they, them pronouns. My son Dylan initially used they, them. So when he first came out and shared, so Dylan first, the first thing I heard was, he was 17. And I get a phone call. His mom and I co-parent him. He must have been with her that week. I get a call. Hey, Dad, can I borrow the Prius? I'm bisexual, and I want to go pick up my girlfriend in Texas. That makes sense, right? You want to take the Prius, right? That gets good gas mileage. So, why people come out, to get, and these are kids who were brought up on the Indigo Girls. So, they could sing every song to you. So, they were brought up in a household that was very open to. But that was how Dylan first came out, was that. And then just by observation, I never saw Dylan with a male. So even though he identified himself as bisexual initially, I never saw him with and that doesn't mean, but that's just the data I was getting. And it's interesting. He's even here, he's given some talks about this, and he's written some music about it. But he was trying to find his own identity, and so he was in relationships with women, and then he was in a band and kind of a co-lead of a kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, kind of a punky alternative band. And the two leads played guitar and co-wrote the songs, or one would write it and they would both sing. And interestingly, he's like this beautiful woman in form, long hair, just pretty, and with his hat on, with his Chuck Taylor Converse on, and he'd be up on stage, and it wasn't unusual that he had most of the lead guitar parts, but it wasn't unusual for him to bump into Dave, the other lead singer, and they would kind of bang into each other, and which, and again, seems like a more masculine kind of behavior, right? And I think he describes that as what was that band from Russia, lesbian band that raised so much stink a few years back, the Pussy Riot or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. that I think he said he was a Pussy Riot girl at that time, like this strong lesbian thing, but that didn't fit really well for him either, you know, like it fit better than things had, but there was still, and, you know, and he talks about times even when he was young, like hearing about operations and thinking about those things, but yeah, when he was 22 or whatever it was, he said, I'm now using they pronouns, they, them, and I am transmasculine, non-binary transmasculine. So non-binary, meaning I don't really fit into the binary well, but I lean masculine. And he would always say, I don't feel like female fits me. That's never really fit me very well. So that's what we used with Dylan at that time, was they, them. Yeah.
So that's what they represents, is not one or the other, just kind of in the.
Yeah,
middle?
so if we went back to, let's see if I can get to that quick.
I read a novel recently where the character was described as they, them, and I'm reading along and I'm thinking they're more than one person. You know, I was really confused for quite some time
Yeah.
till I finally figured out it was one person.
You hadn't talked to a 15-year-old yet to figure out what they meant really, huh?
No, no.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's right. When you hear they, I mean, for me, that was always plural.
Yep.
Right?
Yes.
And I mean, we know that historically, if we look at that word, it's not always plural, right? Like
It's
who
not.
left their coat?
Yep.
That's a singular, you know, so it's not, but that's how it's most conventionally used, as a plural. So
Connie came out of the.
if we go back to this, where you have cis, you know, most cis people use
That's not.
the pronoun he or she that's related to how they identify, you know, how they see themselves in the world. Trans people flip it, right, to the way they now see them, or maybe they've always seen themselves, but doesn't align with their gender identity or their sexual identity. But most trans people will use he or he, him for a trans man, or she, her for a trans woman. Although I still know plenty who will say they'll use he and they, or they. And sometimes they's used too, not just, it's a sort of a political statement, like why does the person say they're pansexual on TV or whatever? It's a way to say, don't assume when you see me. So they, them. So if I say they, them to someone, I'm not assuming. I just, and they can correct me, right? But most often, you know, you think of he, him, she, her, and then non-binary people, there is actually a pretty long list of, I don't know, there's a list of different pronouns that people will use. But the most common by far is they, them. And you see that one because it probably, I mean, my understanding is female does not fit me completely, male does not fit me completely. So I'm going to use something that's different than either of those two.
Well, that's the hill that a lot of people that I talk to want to die on. They want to die on that hill. And I taught English for 42 years, and I'm willing to have a plural pronoun with a singular verb. But it's just so hard for people. It's just so hard for them to hear that. But you know, the more they hear it, and like, just like you said, who left their coat? You know, you have one coat belongs to one person who left their coat. So I think we can do that. But I kind of like the zir, and, but I've also seen where they kind of make it masculine and feminine. So I'm okay with inventing new pronouns that don't distinguish gender. I don't know, that might be a hard.
Yeah, it's, I mean, once again, it's part of the sort of, I would say, evolution that's happening. And yeah, so, but most commonly when you hear they, them, that's a reference to someone who's non-binary person. That he, her, or he, him doesn't fit for them. And so they use they, them.
I like what you said about then you can't assume, and I think that's a big part of what this is. You know, stop identifying me yourself, let me identify myself.
Yeah, well, in a town with lots of professors and teachers and others, you know, there's encouragement that we ask students what their pronouns are, what their name, what names they want to use too, because they might differ. And I mean, names have always differed, whether it was for gender reasons or other reasons. I mean, but just that that's a probably more respectful way to refer to someone is how they see themselves and call, yeah.
So what percentage of people that considers themselves transgender actually have surgery?
I don't know. I don't know if I know that number.
Okay.
It's one
So-
that's probably growing because it's more acceptable now. So,
But obviously not very many because it's expensive, I'm sure, and.
there's a
Definitely.
lot of, I mean, in my involvement in the trans community, most commonly what I see in terms of medical, gender affirming medical procedures, probably the most common is hormone therapy.
Okay.
So Dylan gives himself a shot of testosterone 3 times a week, I think. And that's not unusual. You can go to Planned Parenthood. You don't need a letter from a psychologist or anything. In some places you do. So there's even issues about treatment. Why are mental health people the gatekeepers? You know, why do we determine if someone's, you know, because that makes it sound like it's a disease and it's not a, there's no psychological disorder for someone who is transgender. So I'm just aware of time, so I don't know if this thing cuts off or not. I mean, I'm willing to stay here and keep talking, so. Here and then you're okay.
Are you going to address what the laws are in South Dakota along the line sometime?
Yeah, next time we're gonna talk a little bit about some of that stuff, yeah. And who knows, it could have changed by this time next time.
Wait, no.
But
Legislature's out of session.
Oh, probably not.
That helps.
that doesn't always matter, I think, in our state for some odd reason. Maybe other states too, but yeah. But thank you. I do have one more. If hopefully we're open and I can do this one. Start with it next time. I love this one. This is called the Gender Frybread Person, and my son Dylan and some others, he'd seen different versions and he kind of with that put this one together. But it kind of looks at the areas we've been talking about and but looks at them from a fry bread perspective. So so that's kind of fun. And there's they were on the Guardian magazine or newspaper. These are the ones who were at the teepee at the very beginning. And Muffy and Felipa. This was out in front of the Capitol, I think 2 years ago, middle winter. Oh, it was cold. We were out there. And the tribes, that was, I think Cheyenne River tribe who sent down some people on horseback. They didn't ride down. They came down in horse trailers, but they rode in front of the Capitol on horseback in support of transgender and two-spirit people. That was the day that we then had the hearing with one of the bills that was in front of the Senate or something. So these are some resources. We should get away. I don't know if I'd be happy to share this, presentation with anyone. Some of you will be back next time. Some of you won't. How's that working? We do this again in a week. So anybody not coming back in a week? I'm hunting you down. No, I mean this because I can make sure I have some stuff available better that way. And these are just my references.
You can ask Stacy or Thea to send your presentation to everyone.
Oh, can I?
If you send them the slides, they will send it to everyone in the class. That's what I've done with my classes.
Okay. Is that all right with everyone? Does
Yes.
anybody have an
Yeah.
issue with that?
No, that'd be great.
Please.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be good.
If you have an issue on at the other site and we're still on, then why don't you send it in a chat? Let me know if you don't want that, okay? And I'll ask them to do that, and I'll have a second set of slides for a week from now. So, well, awesome. This is great. And did you have a question? I don't know if I ever made it back.
I was just gonna mention this science fiction novel. It's very famous called The Left Hand of Darkness. Have you ever read that by Ursula Le Guin?
Mm,
Okay, it's about this alien society where they switch gender or they switch sex from male to female and from female to male when they want to mate with someone. So sometimes they're male and sometimes they're female. Well, she used masculine pronouns for the entire book so that when you read it, you always feel like you're reading about men,
oh,
even when they're women. And she was finally criticized for that. And she said, what am I supposed to do? Make up pronouns? Well, yes, yeah, you are.
Please do.
What's the name
welcome
of the?
to now time. Sorry.
The left
Yeah.
hand of darkness.
Yeah, these things push us though, you know, but that's, I mean, what hasn't in our history, right? What changes haven't pushed us, you know, so that's kind of growth and learning. So thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you, all of online people. All right.
Hey, you kind of work.
Yeah. I've been called worse.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome. So, oh yeah, here's my information.
Jeanette, okay, doing all
So,
that.
phone number and you can get me that email.
Look back and go, this is black ant here.
I can't believe you know, what is it?
Mikey?
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually.
I just remembered.
Keep it.
Now, you make that one. I just proposal day.
All right.
Unless I really want to do that.
That's not it.
It's not here.
Just wait.
Yeah.
My list and I come and toss it.
So I didn't know what next week.
Did you say something different than that or? Or?
But I, it's, if I've read some, but also with the alien.
Mention it to her. This is pretty good.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I don't want. I don't like.
You're like me yesterday. Yes. And I'm gonna send something to Guy. What's her name? Thea, yeah, so I can sure. And,
Well, I mean, I'm just.
he forgot. Yeah. Okay. And he forgot. You got all.
I mean, you don't have to have a conversation.
We're not very good shares.
Like a lot of.
He drove over and he says, well, you know.
Oh, cheers.
Still be there.
But I, like I said, I really.
For some reason.
About putting the time. Did you? Yeah.
And I knew my reputation.
I was only half there. When I said this, like, okay, I can send you this. Concept was late and only really half there. Those are the questions.
In the winter time, you know.
Okay.
Lots of different things.
Okay, what's the issue? Figure out what it means.
Yeah, yeah.
Or even bring in some.
Yeah, that was for this.
So whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be. Yeah. And then we actually did pay somebody to do some scavenging and stuff. And even though you see.
Yeah.
Places people come together and places.
We didn't get the ones that he was like.
I'll let you have them.
Well, maybe this-
Here's what I did it was CPAP, bar jacket, Mike, and jeans, and a little shirt.
Yes, we got all.
You know, I mean, it's imagine, and the people. Well, the funny thing was,
Well,
And I said to Tucker, I said, well, you know what, I have to follow me. It's not real. I was like, every other person that was there. They were farmers, you know. No, for me, I think she's last term we wear jeans. For me to be wearing jeans.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you know, I really got.
You're just trying to get the norm is what you were saying. You know?
Yeah.
I had my niece this morning for that, and I bought.
Oh, no.
I would. I would. You see, actually, I've only heard. So.
And you know, if I-
I did.
Probably not.
She has surgery readings.
Under the top.
Yeah, I'm good. Every time I.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I got a couple runs.
Okay. 7 more ways. Seriously. Where the sun don't.
You know, and
I honestly, I just,
At the
it wasn't really about Steve or any of that. I just, but, well, it was during COVID. You know, COVID, and then I came back at the time. You know, there's that time we would kind of go and stop, kind of go, stop. And I just wanted to go, and it was,
She doesn't go.
so I've gone, that's really twice now.
Right, okay. My key.
That's true. My,
No,
me,
no, that's.
are you in that? Oh, yeah. Well, we got some,
Yeah.
you know, Methodist Church, you sign
I wonder.
ministers. And, you know, really, it's just, it hasn't been, they've been bad ministers, but just not a right. fit.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know.
couple last year, so
I don't know if she's seen it or.
that's one part. And then
I don't know.
other parts is just that.
I don't know either, if she has.
They're,
Yeah, we're talking
I don't know,
about.
it's just sort of a congregation
Probably
that's
movie. I
been
understand
more
you
into
love
time. Yeah.
I thought it was the best movie I'd ever seen in my life.
Jesus fight them.
No, I loved it too because.
No,
It was-
it's done here.
It was.
It was so
Yeah,
talked about.
we have the
nostalgic.
extreme
thing.
turned into
Yes,
what's
it would
called
go from,
reconciliation.
did you see it?
Oh, yeah.
Reconciliation.
I love the
Which
way it
is
went from
Meet up people.
something that you
from
really
the
could have been a
whole-
profound thing that you really didn't want to think about for that, to something that was just nostalgic and made you
On
laugh.
Thursday night.
You know, so it was thought provoking.
Yes, it's true.
Because
It was thought provoking without forcing you to think about
from
it.
time to time, she asked me.
Exactly.
you know,
Yeah, and
like,
just,
you know,
I need to see
do-
it here.
And I would, but I just haven't.
Here in Barbie.
Yeah.
Does your wife
Yeah.
go there?
I should have brought, I should have brought my Barbie.
Well, funny.
Did
I
you-
have a Ken doll that looks like Ryan Gosling.
Certainly. I was there this week and it's.
Lots in auction.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was the, you know, I got. it.
Yeah, since they switched to afternoons too, we haven't gone in. Yeah.
In winter to play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I don't remember your
o'clock,
treasure
yeah.
chest of Barbie.
There was a bunch of Barbies that were.
In some ways, I think it's a good.
Weird Barbie. So I had another term for that. What do they call it?
Rubbish ones.
No.
Weird Barbie.
Had a legs all split. Weird Barbie. That was, it was Weird Barbie.
Weird Barbie.
Damaged dolls. I think they
Yeah,
called
something,
them.
yeah.
So I got a box. That was all these
Exactly,
items.
yeah, that's right.
One
I don't know
of
if
them
they're
was
Mormon,
Barbie.
but they might be in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And then.
So it's been a weird, it's like, no one's offended. Well, I mean, other than, no one's really offended me. And
Body paint is.
yeah, no, and it's just like,
Sturgis Barbie and then.
it's kind of funny, growing up in a Mormon tradition,
On, because
and
the color of the
so
Barbie.
set. Like, you don't,
She one with the Barbie
you
pin with the
go
leg
to
on.
the word, that's your image.
Because I do.
You know,
They're so priceless at certain
Choose.
times, but people appreciate it.
and all that stuff said,
Touch dolls.
and way,
Barbie was the one.
there's no reason it's church.
Oh,
And I did that. I mean, I could count on probably a hand and a half how many days in 30 some odd years that I missed church.
Do you remain a member?
Yeah, so I grew up in that way. It's funny, my parents lived in that, so I didn't really grow up. I mean, it's so prevalent in Utah.
I wasn't
when I
gonna
was
take more than
8,
that, that was a
9,
little bit,
my primary, which is kind of the word Sunday school.
That was it.
But they used to have it on a weekday, on Tuesday after school, they would have the kids program.
Oh, you should.
She came to my house, talked to my mom, saw me. She was super sweet, invited me. I felt really great. She gave me.
There's always a place where.
So,
Barbie was
yeah.
always that.
She was really a sweet woman and taught me. a lot. Just gave me
Talking about gender.
But it wasn't really until I was a teen and I had these spiritual questions like,
Yes, yeah.
church is on. So that's why I went. I was like the Mormon missionary. It was really a beautiful space. I love the people I was with.
I wasn't sure.
Where did you go for your mission?
To France, I was sent
In
to
France,
yeah.
yes, I remembered it was somewhere in Europe. I couldn't remember where it was.
Yeah.
But anyway.
But yeah, I
one of
just,
the Things
but you also don't,
that happened.
you know,
a long
like-
time ago
just like you don't in
Is-
any cultural way, you don't realize how
But. that-
much you're indoctrinated, like how you have to believe a particular very thin line until you get a little exposure to
Well,
different ways of
so
thinking.
anyway, I ended up
You
kind of
have
going
a
down this
brother
rabbit
who's
hole
gay,
with that topic.
I
And
give my
and it's
brother
not
up,
the
or
case that there's
give the
any-
church up, or to have a brother who's, smoked marijuana, do I, which one do I give up? To have a brother with long hair, all these things that they were telling me were bad, even if it wasn't
I believe.
explicitly said, it was
Yeah, but I
always
think that's
implicitly
interesting.
implied that.
Talking about identifying a birth. I
And-
don't know
Oh,
how
why
much
should that
much
happen?
variability there is.
So for me, that was the blessing though, because really what it did for me is even when I was in the
Adult
church.
women,
Oh,
there's, in adult
I
women,
didn't
there's a
come from a
lot of
judgmental
variability.
place. I didn't,
Right.
Like,
I knew people
Why
could be
do
good
their
no matter
structures
if they
different
came to church, if they didn't, if they were gay, if they had long hair, just,
And they're, but
but then there was this.
but I mean.
yes, I know. what you
Back.
mean. But their whole physical structure, yes.
Yeah, but that,
Yes, I.
so it's kind of funny, then
I
I
don't
also see,
sense at birth.
like I didn't even
Yeah, I
join
think
the
it's really
UCC
fascinating
in 5
that
years.
that it's actually talked about.
And even
about
then I
how-
was a
how
little
much-
hestant to join, like,
Could
I don't even know if
I
I
got,
got this.
I got a sense that
I mean,
like, maybe the-
Do I think Christ was an
Not
amazing
so
dude? It
much.
sounds like from everything.
Yeah.
I heard about him,
As
it was
much,
really
I don't-
remarkable.
I don't know either.
But it
But do I
really
believe
surprised
like
me
that
it's
I was
actually, it
born
was
into
actually.
sin, that Jesus came and resurrected, that his atonement paid the price for that kind of, that sort of more fundamental Christian thing. I don't,
No, Barbie
that doesn't make much sense to me. If I was
Unless she
born
wants
into
to.
sin, I think.
I know it's not really worry.
No,
it's
but
just-
just- there it is, right.
I've always said that once I became a parent, I became convinced that such a thing as consent. And the reason for that was holding my innocent.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe or something.
You are?
Well, I have some candy, but it's got
And,
peanut butter in it.
My evidence is that
Kids
the
are
kid
allergic.
Well, just ask them, are you allergic to peanut butter?
full until it saw peanut.
Sure.
And then it's like,
I don't want to-
No, no.
That's
Well, I bought
the reason.
No.
Who's in control here, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
There's only so much you can do.
Yeah. And
Actually,
it's
what I
true.
started doing.
It is control.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
yeah,
give
you do
you
control.
what-
It's true, they're a whole, yeah.
The nice thing is the shelf life is like decades.
Baby. Baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hear- I'm wet, I need food.
Yeah. But the beer test is what always.
I had
Yeah, I had 4 of them,
Take
you know, I had
something or
4
take it
beer
and give it to
tests.
somebody
Yeah.
else.
Mhm.
That's true too.
Yeah,
What fun is it, like, you know?
mine was red, so.
Like half the game is
And so-
swapping for the stuff you don't like.
Yeah.
You know,
So
I'll
it-
do 3 of
it,
these for one of those.
I guess it-
I know.
Yeah, it felt like something.
They'll survive. They will know.
Right,
That could be.
all right, guys, bye-bye.
Well, thank you much.
Yeah,
for
thank
doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
well, it's always, it's fun to present with something that's meaningful and have experience in it.
Timely, and it's so timely, you know, I mean, it's such a thing in the state.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we literally, the transformation project has funds for kids to go to neighboring states to get care and treatment because they can't get it here.
Yeah.
We've got grants for that and so.
It really doesn't make sense at all. And, yeah, the mindset, you know, I was just, what I was sitting and thinking about, well, kind of late in your visit about the woman or that I just read about, in the last week, the athlete, she's I think a sprinter or a runner of some sort from South Africa. And, she's just running in women's sports because she was, born without a parent, male genitalia. However, upon closer examination, after she was forced to because her testosterone levels were too high, they did find that she has testicles that are embedded.
Yeah.
And that, so as she was assigned a woman at birth, she could legally compete in women's sports here in South Dakota.
Hmm.
Even though it's not
Ah.
really fair.
Yeah, right. So maybe testosterone levels is
It's
a
a-
fairer way.
yeah.
In college athletics.
Yes, well, they
Go
do,
that way.
they do test, yeah, for college level. And so, you know, there is no real binary test or binary
Well, even chromosomes, I mean,
Yeah.
you learn about genetics, there's.
XXYs.
Or some people are XXY, I mean, what's that?
Right,
You know?
yeah.
But then there's expression of the genes too,
Yes.
because that can vary all over the place. You can have genes, but they may not work.
Yeah.
So,
Well, anyway, yeah, it was very informative and stuff.
Well, I'm glad it
Help
was
me answer a
useful.
question or two.
Yeah, one,
Yeah.
write some down if you
And
got
present
something
it.
next time, you know?
And present a question or two. You know,
Yeah.
Make me think.
regarding the pronouns, do some say we? I mean, like you said, we go to the Methodist church. I was
Yes.
Thinking, oh, you're we?
Yeah. Yes.
Is we an appropriate?
I haven't heard
pronoun?
someone
No,
refer to
no,
themselves as
it's
we, like,
They there, but we, I mean, that sounds.
Yeah.
Almost biblical. You know?
Yeah,
so let it be written.
very
Yeah.
inclusive. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, thank you all too. Appreciate, always good to have an engaged crew watching and listening and asking questions. So
And I think you had that today.
let's see here. Oh. I'll see if it's above 20 in the 20s yet.
Oh, yeah. What?
What's it supposed to get to? Is it 30s today? 40s.
About what it is right now.
Tomorrow, the rest of the week. Tomorrow, rest of the week.
What's it now?